second week on our Praying with the Mystics series, and in our worship last Sunday, Pastor Laurie shared a prayer by Teresa of Avila. Now, Teresa is one of the most famous mystics of the Western Christian tradition. She was born in Spain in the early 16th century at a time of religious and political upheaval. She's a remarkable woman and a significant theologian, and she's well known for her writings on prayer and her work as a monastic reformer. In her autobiography, The Book of My Life, she describes herself as being a frivolous young woman, and her mother having died, her father sent her to a convent to be educated and to keep her safe. And throughout her life, Teresa suffered from a variety of different health problems, which often became an important locus for her spiritual growth. When she was about 39 years old, she was converted to a life of deep spirituality while gazing at a statue of Jesus being beaten before his crucifixion. And from that point, she pursued a life of prayer and began to have visions and revelations. The Protestant Reformation was just getting underway when Teresa was a child. The new theology of salvation, articulated by reformers such as Martin Luther and John Calvin, were seen as a dangerous threat to the Roman Catholic system of salvation, centered on the sacraments. Teresa believed that the best way to fight such heresy was to strengthen the spiritual life of the Roman Catholic Church, and her autobiography laid out her practices and the reality of God's action through her for others to see. Using a familiar analogy, she describes prayer as being like watering a garden so that good plants can grow. For beginners, it is hard work, like getting water from a well. But with practice, it becomes easier, as if the water is being brought up by a water wheel. And as God begins to take over more of the work of prayer, the garden is watered by a stream. And finally, God showers the garden with rain. So for Teresa, this analogy describes 4 degrees of prayer that one can experience on the spiritual journey. With each degree of prayer, the garden receives water in a different way, with varying amounts of effort on our part. So during our midweek reflection today, I will read through the stages. And after each stage, invite you to reflect on your own experience of prayer and your own spiritual journey.
Grant us the wisdom to perceive you, hearts awakened to receive you, minds alert to thoughts that grieve you, God of mercy, hear our prayer.
So Teresa describes the first degree of prayer as one for beginners and those who find no taste in prayer. As a garden that is watered by a well takes much labor from the gardener, who has to fill and carry and empty the buckets repeatedly, so this degree or kind of prayer is really hard work. Our mind is so busy and distracted that it takes a lot of effort to focus as we pray. Now, Teresa suggests that the beginner think back over their life and meditate on the life of Christ as a way to block out completing thoughts. This, she says, weakens and tires the mind so that it is more receptive to being in prayer. It may feel like we're getting nowhere. There may be no tears or tenderness and interior feelings of devotion at this stage, she says, but we do our part and persevere anyway. When have you experienced prayer like this, where it seems like hard work that accomplishes little or nothing? Teresa's message for you is, do not despair and do not give up. Instead, do your part and persevere.
Grant us faithfulness in praying, strength to keep our souls from straying, sense to cease from disobeying. God of mercy, hear our prayer.
The second degree of prayer, Teresa calls the prayer of the quiet. In this stage, the garden is watered by means of a water wheel. There is less labor for the gardener than the previous stage and more enjoyment, for we are able to take some rest and not work continually. And as we let go of our effort and striving, grace is revealed to our soul. And in this second degree of prayer, our will is in union with God, and the memory and the intellect can either help or hinder us. In the prayer of the quiet, we experience consolation, that feelings of love for God. And Teresa says that God may even send tears that flow with joy. So what about this second degree of prayer? Have you felt this transition from prayer that seems to demand a tremendous amount of effort to where it seems that in letting go of your working so hard that God is in fact working with you?
Grant us diligence in doing, patience when your truth pursuing, eager to receive renewing. God of mercy, hear our prayer.
Teresa writes that the third degree of prayer is akin to a garden that is watered by a stream, a river, or a brook. Though the gardener does need to direct the water, the Lord helps us so much that we experience pleasure and delight. Because the waters of grace have risen up to the neck of the soul so that it can neither advance nor retreat. Teresa describes this degree of prayer as glorious folly and a heavenly madness, although it's not yet complete union with God. Have you experienced this kind of bliss that Teresa describes in this third degree of prayer? Or perhaps the realization that it's actually about God and God's work, not ours. If so, be reassured and rejoice, resting in God's presence.
Grant us courage to proclaim you, Savior of our lives, we name you. May our actions never shame you. God of mercy, hear our prayer.
Teresa explains explains that this final and fourth degree of prayer is impossible to understand and impossible to describe, for in it the soul appears to be joined with God. As rain showers the garden, we as gardeners do no work at all to water it. We only enjoy something that is beyond our understanding. All our faculties fail us and are suspended during this kind of prayer. The restless memory rests. The will is fully busy loving God, but is unaware. And the intellect comprehends nothing. In this stage, we are enjoying some good in which all good is gathered together, but this good is incomprehensible. Teresa veers from the garden analogy then to suggest that when the soul feels divine union with God, it is like when a flame leaps out of a fire. The soul leaps forth out of itself. Have you ever glimpsed moments of union with God? For the remainder of this week, I invite you to return to Teresa of Avila's 4 degrees of prayer and that gardening and watering analogy as you engage in prayer. What do you think of these 4 stages that Teresa describes? First the well, then the water wheel, then the river, and then finally the rain. Perhaps, in fact, there's a metaphor more apt than watering a garden for your unique experience of prayer and how it feels at different times, or how it's changed from when you were a child. What is prayer like for you? And what do you wish prayer were like for you?